All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our next teaching conversations. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, but today we're going to get into the weeds just a little bit because when we talk about teaching in an educational setting, we have to know some of that vocabulary. We have to know, what am I required to do? How am I going to measure that? How's that going to be followed up on? And how does that cycle return? That's where we're kind of headed today. So we're going to be putting some help things in the letter boxes above and below to help you with some of the vocabulary, but buckle up because we're in for a treat. We have Ellen Kolbeck, who is the Dean of Health Services, with us today. And so, Ellen, if you would introduce yourself, and then we'll get right into our topic.
Thank you, Matt. As the Dean of Health Professions, it's a passion I've had for a long time, is student learning outcomes assessment. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I will try to keep it brief because I tell you, I really do enjoy this a great deal, and I will try to keep it so just what you need to know right now. And as you move forward, then we can add to it and you can have conversation with me if you want to in more detail. So why do we do this? Colleges and universities required by accrediting agencies to have ongoing assessment of student learning. Richland accredits the Higher Learning Commission, and we must show them that we assess student learning for achievement of learning goals and use that information to improve student learning. They also require substantial participation of faculty. That's why I'm going to provide an overview of student learning assessment at Richland.
All right. So with that, we're going to kind of get into some of the details on this, but it really goes back to what's our primary purpose, education. What is our goal? We got to lay those out, and we're going to be measured by them and held accountable for them. And so let's go ahead and fire off from there.
Okay. Well, let's just start with a definition of student learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are statements of the knowledge, skills, and attitudes individual students should possess after completion of a sequence of learning experiences. They're realistic, observable, and measurable. At Richland, our student learning outcomes assessment framework shows the relationship between course, program, and cross-disciplinary outcomes.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you have a little bit of a diagram that shows some of the interrelationships between these. Is that correct?
That is. Since most people are familiar with course objectives, we'll start a discussion with those. As you see here in this bottom circle are our course outcomes. So the course objectives state the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that a student should achieve by the end of a course. These are found near the beginning of a syllabus. During a course, faculty must include content that provides students the opportunity to meet the stated objectives. Many CTE programs are required to have content and assessments that measure 3 learning domains. The first is the cognitive, what the student knows. Second is psychomotor, what the student can do. And third is the affective, how the student behaves. Course syllabi have content outlines to guide both the faculty and the students. The outline provides the topics that are covered during the course and will help the students to meet the course objectives. So how do we know if the students meet the objectives? Well, assessments determine this. So it's important to align the type of assessment to the objective. The type of assessment used can vary greatly between courses and programs and disciplines. If a program discipline requires measurement of specific learning domains, the assessment must align with the domain. For example, if the objective is to perform a task, the assessment will probably occur in a lab with an evaluation tool that includes the required steps would be used to determine if the objectives were met. Assessments generally determine grades in a course, but they're also important because some of them are used in program student learning outcomes. Which brings us to the next circle on our Venn diagram. As we look at this framework, the CTE programs are required to have outcomes that list the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that a student should achieve by the end of a program. Disciplines that we note here, such as mathematics, science, communications, social science, and humanities and fine arts also have outcomes. These are statements of the knowledge, skills, and attitudes individual students should possess after completion of a course in one of those broad disciplines. So program student disciplines also appear on course syllabi. Faculty designate in a chart which ones are covered in the course. For CTE programs, it's not required to cover all of them in each course.
And this ties really nicely in with our conversation that we've already had, that we've talked about that master syllabus, and specifically in that master syllabus, there are specific entries that have to be done. And as we mentioned with Tina in our syllabus discussion, the lead instructor or the dean will help you be very specific on what those outcomes that apply to your course are. And so this is not something you have to do on your own. This is part of that team effort.
Well said. So each program discipline has a plan, and that lists the assessment tool that is used for an outcome, and each has a benchmark that is used to determine if it is met. So each semester, faculty enter their data for assessments chosen as part of the program discipline report. Annually, faculty within the program or discipline meet. They review data from all of the courses and create improvement plans. These reports are reviewed by the dean and then uploaded for review by other administrators as part of their annual program viability process. And a faculty member will provide details of these plans and specific assessments during the mentor portion of this program. Don't want to overwhelm you right now, but really want to see how you fit in and how important it is, the work you're doing.
Absolutely. So being a part of the process, not responsible for the whole process, just your piece.
Correct. And now we see there's one circle left, and that's called the cross-disciplinary outcomes. And the cross-disciplinary outcomes, or we call them CDOs, you'll hear that, we have lots of acronyms in higher education. These are really general education outcomes. They're not program or discipline specific, but they're very broad and general. So the first is the degree-seeking student will communicate effectively in writing. The second is they will orally communicate effectively. The third is they will assess, access, evaluate, and appropriately use information in various research and applied contexts, so referring to information literacy. And then the last is they will think critically and creatively. And so how this fits in, again, it is in the syllabus, as you've already talked about. And then if you have an assessment in that course that will meet specific criterion, you would mark that in that chart. And then what happens is that each year one is assessed. And so we rotate through. So the college has one each year. And then at the beginning of the spring semester, faculty are asked to complete a short survey to identify if you have assignments within that course that meet the cross-disciplinary outcome. What happens then is we call them artifacts, because this is going to be these assessments that you would do, and it could be a variety of kinds of things. And you have that opportunity to list that on the survey. And then faculty are randomly chosen, and certain students within your roster are chosen. It's randomly, so it'll be number 1, 3, and 5 on your roster. You'll be asked to submit artifacts for that particular thing if you're chosen, and only if you're chosen. And so then you would be asked to upload those artifacts. Those are then reviewed at the end of the semester, and then then those are evaluated later. And I don't want to get into too much detail because it is somewhat overwhelming, but our Student Learning Outcomes Assessment Committee handles all that. They're really good about communicating with faculty and letting them know what to do and when to do it. So that is really kind of an overview of our system, our whole framework, our whole system, and how these all fit together. And faculty, you can see it is absolutely faculty driven, and without faculty support, both in providing artifacts and participating in the evaluation and assessment, this wouldn't work.
So am I correct if I did a quick thought process as I'm hearing and as I'm listening, because even as long as I have taught at the college, some of these learning outcomes and some of these things, while always been present and a consistent thread, we're focusing, we're being strategic, we're being specific on how we address this, and particularly how we measure and review them, more than maybe we have in the past. And so one of the things is, if I summarize this, whereas the college has determined via what the state requires, these are overall outcomes. Some are cross-disciplinary, some are specific to a course, some are specific to a program. Those have been laid out for us. And within our courses, we're going to address certain course specific, and using some of our course specific activities, we may address some of those cross-disciplinary. For example, you mentioned writing or speaking or research and being able to use data. Whereas we're not necessarily teaching that thing, that's a part of the process, reaching the outcomes of our course. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Of course, it's very important. And this is more programs and disciplines look at the broader picture to make sure that are these being addressed. So if you have a CTE program, where do you know that students, you can say a student can communicate effectively? Written communication, oral communication. It may be in a writing course, it may be in a communications course, but it may be within the program or certainly reinforced in a program. So the main content may be taught, but then you want to make sure they've kept those skills. So you may have writing assignments in your courses throughout the program. You may have oral presentations. You certainly may have things that will go critical and creative thinking. And so these are all things that you would be including, and you'd be looking at the course specifically to make sure that we don't have holes, so that if someone is completing a degree, that we wouldn't have a deficit, in their learning. And of course, for the programs, it could be tied into a program specific accreditation, so a programmatic accreditation. So you may have an agency who has requirements that have specific things you need to measure and demonstrate by their standards. So they're very closely related. They do not come from the top down. They originally came from faculty and came up. Again, it could be from accreditation, but we have, going back to the early 2000s, we had a task force who worked on creating this whole system. Was certainly been refined and then taken over by our Student Learning Outcomes Assessment Committee, as I mentioned earlier. SLOA, you'll hear that acronym.
And that goes back to, again, working as part of this team, working as we've woven this thread through this course, that we are a community college that serves the community, but we are teaching community as well. And so as a team, we approach this process. This just gives us a framework, an organization, and a methodology to ensure, as you mentioned, that there are no holes, that there are no gaps as we come out of this. To tie this over into our discussion of Canvas in this course, this is where your technology can help. Because when we have students submit writing samples, when we have students submit videos of their presentations, or students submit a reading, students submit various pieces, Canvas can collect those and help us keep track and focus on, this is where they've been assessed on this. This is where they can prove this. And so, as you mentioned, those random students that are chosen, those random pieces of work, I'm thinking of my own classes. I can go and call out, oh, in this area is where we did this. I can pull this right out of Canvas to provide to the team as evidence. So by thinking ahead and planning ahead based on the goals, planning how we're going to assess, tracking, and gathering that data in a way that's accessible and organized, helps us truly ensure that we're meeting all the needs of the courses, but also the students.
And that's the key. I'm really glad you're wrapping up with that point, because this is all about, number one, ensuring that students are learning. How do we know? Well, we can say, oh, well, but this is evidence, documentation that we know what they're learning. We have that evidence. And then the key is that we do something with that data, with that information that we have. So if students aren't doing as well as expected, what are we doing in our courses to make the learning better? How are we improving? And we've seen over the years that this system works, where faculty have gone, wow, that we didn't meet that benchmark. Why not? Well, sometimes it's improving instructions for something. Sometimes it's bringing in someone from the library to help with that. How do you research? How do you find credible sources? How do you cite sources? Using those kinds of things. So there's lots of resources we have at Richland, to improve. And we use this for faculty development, as well. So it is all about ensuring they're learning and improving that learning.
And the other thing that as we do tie this off, this is also a way that we can efficiently use our resources to help students, because while there are some cross-disciplinary outcomes, or there are some skills that students are going to encounter multiple times, not every skill is something we need them to encounter or relearn multiple times. Let's use our instructional time effectively to meet the needs that we've laid out, so that when they get to the end, the students have really seen both the breadth, but also the depth of what they need to know and understand.
We really want to prepare students, whether they're transferring to a four-year university or whether they're going into the workplace, that they have that knowledge, those skills, that affective domain to be successful.
Well, this is really, as you mentioned, just scratching the surface of this topic. But remember, as a CTE instructor or an adjunct instructor, you're part of a team. You're not responsible for the whole process. You just need to understand, where's my part? Where do I plug in? And then as you develop and as you become part of this learning community and teaching community, then you can explore these in greater depth to make it more effective, again, for those students. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us. Thank you for sharing this with us. This is a great graphic. I will definitely make sure we include this in the course itself. So folks, you can go back and you can reference this, especially when we talk about those your turn pieces where we need to reflect on some of these.